Okay, now I'm going to prepare my high altitude adjusted version. All right, so let's start with the flour. First, at high altitude you have lower air pressure, and that causes gases from leavening agents to expand more quickly. So the leavening agents are the baking soda and the baking powder, and because of the lower air pressure, you need less of that, because the more leavening agents you have, it can cause your breads to rise too quickly and then collapse. So we're going to reduce that. We're going to increase our flour because of the same thing. The lower air pressure means that the structure is not going to hold as well together, so more flour gives it some stability and holds it together. So again, it won't collapse. So let's just start with the flour. Now, we used 1 cup in our other recipe. Where was my spoon for scooping? I gave you one. Okay, so 1 cup is what we put in the other one. I'm going to do that again. Again, I used my spoon to fill the cup, the back of my knife to level it out. Okay, so I've got 1 cup, and I'm going to add 2 tablespoons extra of flour. At my altitude, I always add about 2 tablespoons. That's good for about between 5,000 and 7,000 feet altitude. Add an additional 2 tablespoons. So 1 cup, 2 tablespoons of flour. Now I'm going to put in my baking soda and my baking powder. Now I told you that because of the lower air pressure, we need less. So in the other pumpkin bread, I used a teaspoon of baking soda. I'm going to use 1/4 of that. So 1/4 of baking soda, teaspoon. Now the baking powder, same. It's a tablespoon, there's a teaspoon, so I'm going to use 1/4 teaspoon. Now actually I want to use about 1/8. I only used 1/2 teaspoon of the baking soda in the last recipe, so I just scooped a little bit out because I just want about 1/8 of a teaspoon. But I want 1/4 teaspoon of the baking powder. Okay. Salt stays the same, as do the other the flavors. So I need 1/4 teaspoon of refined sea salt and a teaspoon of cinnamon. Ooh, almost lost that. I'm pouring this over the counter, not over my bowl, because if I put too much, I don't want too much going in my recipe, but it looks like I have just enough cinnamon left for that. Okay, 1 teaspoon of that. I'm going to do my flour. Let's see, 1/4 teaspoon of cloves and nutmeg. So not everything needs to change. Cloves and 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Okay. Now the sugar. Now I used 3/4 cups of sugar. Remember I did it with I used 1/4 cup and I just put it in the bowl because I was using exactly 3/4 cups. But now we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to put 3/4 cups in this cup. 2, 3. Now, you want to decrease the sugar at high altitude baking because sugar weakens the structure. So for the same reason that I added more flour, I want to reduce the sugar. So for about every cup of sugar, you want to reduce by about 1 tablespoon. I have 3/4 cup of sugar. So I'm going to take out about half a tablespoon. I'll just put that right back. Now I'm going to put my sugar inside my flour mixture. Whisk my dry ingredients together. Just a quick little mix. Okay. And now we can move on to our wet ingredients. So, our wet ingredients. I'm going to use the rest of the pumpkin. Okay, that's another, it's about 7.5 ounces from my 15-ounce can. The oil, I used half a cup. I'm going to do that again. Half a cup. Okay. And now the eggs. Okay, so my wet ingredients are the eggs, olive oil, and pumpkin. Okay, so last time I used 1.5 eggs. In high altitude baking, you need to increase the liquids. So increasing the liquids, because of the lower air pressure, you get faster evaporation. So you need more liquids to make up to compensate for that. So I used 1.5 eggs for my last one. I'm going to use 2 eggs now. And I'm going to do that for the extra liquid. So I'm going to put my eggs in a separate thing to make sure I don't get any shells. Looks good. Now you can do a lot of different, you can add liquid in different ways. You could add 2 tablespoons of water. That's a good go-to. Just add a little bit extra water in any recipe. Whenever I'm making something cakey, like cakes or breads, I like to use an extra egg, or not a whole extra egg. So what I would usually do is use an extra egg white. But because this was 1.5, I just used 2 eggs. It's a little weird because of the way the eggs work. So I like to use extra eggs. It just makes it extra moist and fluffy. Great. So I'm going to double check my recipe and make sure I added everything. I've got the flour, sugar, baking soda, blah, 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 eggs, olive oil, and pumpkin. Okay. Now I'm going to mix this together. Okay, same as before. I'm going to mix until it seems well mixed, well blended, and stop. It's coming together quite nicely. I do want to make sure that I don't have any flour clumps. Good. That looks really smooth and lovely. Use my spatula. This bowl is kind of heavy. It's a little harder for me to hold. Alright. Like before, give it a little tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Alright, I've got my 2 breads. This one, unchanged. This one adjusted for high altitude. Okay, so I'm going to put in this one first. Putting in the unadjusted one on the left, the adjusted one on the right. However, if these come out the way I think they will, you're going to be able to tell the difference just by looking at them. So, I'm going to bake these for about 45 minutes. Now, my recipe says 45 to 55 minutes. I'm going to always start it at the very lowest time. So 45 minutes. Check it then, and then if it needs more time, add a couple of minutes at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and set a timer. Alexa, set a timer for 45 minutes.
45 minutes, starting now.
What I expect to see is that the pumpkin bread, where we did not make any adjustments, I expect that that's going to rise too quickly and collapse, so it's going to sink in the middle. Whereas the other one, I'm hoping for a nice rounded dome. So, fingers crossed, I'll see you in 45 minutes.